In a world consumed by fear, tyranny, and the silence of those who looked away, one woman dared to defy the impossible. She was not a soldier, not a spy, and certainly not a hero in the conventional sense, but her courage would change the fate of thousands. Alone, with nothing but her wits, bravery, and sheer determination, she embarked on a mission that would put her life on the line every single day. The Nazis believed they could crush humanity, but they hadn't counted on her. What she did next would shock the world, and you're about to witness a story so daring, so dangerous, that it sounds almost unbelievable.
Before the world fell into chaos, before the echo of boots and the shadow of fear stretched across her town, she lived a life that seemed almost ordinary. Her mornings were filled with the soft hum of daily routines, the smell of fresh bread baking in the corner bakery, the chatter of neighbors exchanging news, and the distant laughter of children playing in cobblestone streets. She walked these streets with a quiet confidence, her eyes alert but gentle, always noticing the small details that others overlooked. A stray cat hiding in an alley, a wounded bird fluttering to safety, a neighbor in need of help. Life was predictable, safe, and comfortable in its own small way. Yet beneath that calm surface, a storm was quietly gathering, one that would soon engulf everything she knew. Her family, though ordinary, was close-knit and loving. Her mother had instilled in her a sense of compassion and moral responsibility, teaching her that courage was not measured by bravery in battle, but by the willingness to stand up for what was right, even when the cost was high. Her father, a man of quiet wisdom, had a gentle insistence that she observe the world carefully and never take her freedoms for granted. She had siblings with whom she shared secrets, laughter, and dreams of a life unburdened by the looming shadow of politics or war. Yet, like most people, she had no inkling that the world she knew would soon fracture under the weight of a cruel and relentless force. The first whispers of change were subtle, almost imperceptible. News from the cities spoke of marches, political upheaval, and soldiers moving through neighboring regions. Rumors swirled like leaves in the wind, but few truly understood what they meant. At first, it was easy to dismiss them as distant troubles, problems of the powerful, not of ordinary townsfolk like her. But the subtle unease in the market, the strange tension in the conversations of grown men, and the hurried gestures of neighbors who once greeted each other warmly, all hinted that something was coming. That sense of foreboding clung to her like a shadow, growing heavier with each passing day. Despite the uncertainty, she continued with her life, helping at the local library and teaching children to read in the afternoons. She found solace in small acts of kindness, feeding the hungry stray dogs that roamed the streets, helping elderly neighbors carry groceries, and lending a sympathetic ear to anyone in need. Little did she know that these simple habits of compassion were quietly preparing her for the unimaginable challenges that lay ahead. In a world about to be consumed by hatred and cruelty, her empathy would become a weapon more powerful than any gun or army. But life's fragile calm shattered one morning in the most shocking way. She woke to the distant but unmistakable sound of marching boots. At first, she thought it might be the local militia or a ceremonial parade, something familiar and harmless. But the rhythm was too methodical, too menacing, too organized. Her stomach twisted as she looked out the window and saw the first line of Nazi soldiers entering the town square, their uniforms stark against the pale winter streets. Flags with the swastika fluttered cruelly in the wind, and the soldiers' eyes were cold, scanning the town as though assessing it for something to conquer. Time seemed to stop. The street she had walked every day, the bakery where she had bought bread, the library where she had spent countless hours, all of it now felt unfamiliar, alien, and dangerous. People hurried inside, shutters banged down against the sudden intrusion, and whispers of fear rippled through the town. She felt a chill run down her spine. This was no parade. This was occupation. And in that moment, she understood a terrifying truth. The life she had known, the safety she had taken for granted, was gone. Her mind raced. She thought of the Jewish families she had known since childhood, the neighbors who had always smiled warmly as they passed each other on the street. Were they aware of what was coming? Were they safe? She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest, a heavy, invisible force demanding that she act. But how could one woman stand against such power? She had no weapons, no army, and no training. Yet, deep in her heart, she knew she could not remain idle. As the soldiers advanced, entering homes and questioning residents, a strange mixture of fear and resolve coursed through her veins. Her life was about to change forever, but she didn't yet know how. All she knew was that ordinary people often found courage in extraordinary moments. And perhaps, if she dared to act, she could tip the scales in favor of life. And then, the sound of boots stopped right outside her front door. A sharp knock shattered the tense silence. Her breath caught, heart pounding. She stepped toward the door, the air heavy with dread. Whoever was behind it, soldier or neighbor, friend or foe, would change everything. The door handle turned slowly. The knock on the door was deliberate, controlled, a sound that seemed to echo through the house and into her bones. She froze for a moment, weighing her options. One wrong move, one word spoken in the wrong tone, could seal not only her fate, but the fate of everyone she cared about. Slowly, she opened the door, and there they were, Nazi officers, uniforms immaculate, boots polished, faces hardened and cold. Their eyes swept the room as though searching for something or someone they had already decided to destroy. The officers demanded identification and questioned her about her family, her neighbors, her daily activities. Every word had to be chosen carefully, every movement cautious. She sensed immediately that nothing in this encounter would be ordinary. Behind the facade of polite interrogation, she could feel the menace, the quiet cruelty of men who believed themselves untouchable. The soldiers left as abruptly as they had arrived, leaving behind an oppressive silence that seemed heavier than the winter air. In the following days, the changes became impossible to ignore. Notices appeared on doors, announcing new laws that segregated Jews from the rest of the town. Shops, once bustling with conversation, became ghostly, as Jewish owners were forced to close or surrender their businesses. Curfews were imposed. Families were restricted to their homes, and strangers in the street were watched with suspicion. The town she had always known, familiar, warm, human, was transforming into something cold, sinister, and unrecognizable. She walked the streets in quiet disbelief, her heart aching as she passed families she had known her entire life. She could see the fear etched into their faces, the subtle despair of people stripped of choice, of freedom, of dignity. Mothers clutched their children tightly. Fathers averted their eyes, pretending calm they did not feel. She realized then that she could no longer hide in her small world, pretending that the storm was someone else's problem. Every act of cruelty she witnessed was a call to action. Every trembling child a silent plea that begged for intervention. And yet, fear was never far from her mind. She understood that defiance came at a cost, that every step toward helping someone could invite unimaginable consequences. She remembered the soldiers at her door and the coldness in their eyes. She remembered the notices posted on windows, the warning of what happened to those who resisted. But fear, she also knew, could not paralyze her. The question was no longer whether to act. It was how to act without losing everything she loved. Her first act of courage came quietly, almost by accident. A neighbor, a kind elderly man she had known since childhood, had been forcibly taken from his home. She discovered his empty house, the faint scent of smoke, and the evidence of a hurried search. Something inside her shifted at that moment. It wasn't heroism or bravery in the abstract. It was anger, outrage, and the undeniable sense that she could not allow such injustice to continue. She began to seek ways to help, small and careful at first. She delivered food under cover of night, passed along messages between families, and offered shelter to those who had nowhere else to go. Word of the deportations reached her like a sharp blade. Trains filled with terrified families were leaving town, bound for camps she had only heard whispered about, places that promised death in ways too cruel to imagine. She realized that what she was doing was no longer enough. She would need to take bolder steps, riskier moves, and she would need allies. But how could one woman, alone, stand against a machine built on cruelty, bureaucracy, and terror? Still, she could not ignore the responsibility pressing on her heart. Every day she walked past the frightened faces, she felt the urgency growing. A simple choice silence was no longer an option. Her courage, small at first, had to become action, and her action, she knew, had to grow into something larger, something that could save lives. And yet, with every new plan came the shadow of danger. A single betrayal could undo months of careful work, and a single mistake could cost lives she was just beginning to protect. Then one evening, as she returned from delivering supplies to a small group hiding in the outskirts of the town, she overheard a chilling conversation. Two soldiers were speaking in hushed tones near the train station. They mentioned an upcoming transport, a shipment of families scheduled for the next morning. Her heart stopped. The names they listed included people she had known since childhood, people she had shared meals, laughter, and holidays with. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. If she didn't act, the consequences would be irreversible. For the first time, the weight of responsibility fully settled on her shoulders. She understood that she was no longer merely a witness to history. She was a participant, a guardian, and, potentially, the only chance for survival for those she could save. The night stretched long and tense before her, filled with whispered plans, torn scraps of paper, and endless questions. She knew the decision she made tonight could alter the course of hundreds of lives or end them. And then she saw the shadows moving across the street, boots, rifles, and the unmistakable presence of the soldiers she had hoped to avoid. They were coming. The soldiers' shadows stretched long across the cobblestones, their presence a dark, unyielding reminder that nothing would ever be the same. She pressed herself against the wall of a narrow alley, heart hammering, every instinct screaming at her to run, but running would be foolish. Instead, she waited, silent and still, watching them pass, counting their boots, memorizing their faces. That night, fear became more than an emotion. It became a weapon, sharpening her senses, teaching her that every movement could mean life or death. It was the following morning that she made her first choice, a choice that would mark the beginning of her journey as a rescuer. A small family, friends of her childhood, were being rounded up by the soldiers, and her heart clenched at the sight. The father clutched a child to his chest. The mother whispered frantic reassurances she did not believe. The soldiers barked orders, herding them toward a truck that would take them to a place from which there was no return. She knew that if she stayed hidden, if she said nothing, if she did nothing, she would be complicit. Her hands trembled, but her mind worked with precision. She had watched soldiers come and go, memorized the timing of patrols, and identified the narrow alleys and back streets that could conceal a person. Taking a deep breath, she stepped from the shadows, feigning a stumble as if she had lost her footing. The soldiers turned, curious, momentarily distracted. In that fleeting distraction, she slipped forward, grabbed the youngest child, and pulled him behind a nearby stack of crates. The mother's eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with silent gratitude. Her first act of courage was small, almost accidental, but it changed everything. She realized that ordinary actions could have extraordinary consequences. A loaf of bread hidden in a pocket, a whispered warning in the night, a child snatched from danger. These were the tools she had. And yet, even as her heart swelled with the adrenaline of success, she knew that every step she took carried unimaginable risk. One mistake, one soldier noticing a missing child, could lead to her arrest, or worse. Word of her bravery spread quietly, carried by whispers among the frightened families she had begun to help. Soon, others approached her, seeking guidance, protection, or a place to hide. She hesitated at first, unsure if she could trust anyone in a town now saturated with fear and suspicion. But necessity demanded collaboration. To save lives, she could not act alone. Carefully, she began to assemble a small network. Friends, neighbors, and even sympathetic townspeople who understood that their courage, too, had a role to play. Her actions, however, were not without consequence. Soldiers began to notice discrepancies, missing children, unexplained absences, and small acts of defiance that hinted at something larger at play. Each time she returned home, she found herself double-checking locks, peering through curtains, and imagining the soldiers watching, waiting, calculating her next move. Fear was constant, but it had become a companion rather than a paralyzer. She learned to work in its presence, to let it sharpen her instincts, and to let it guide her choices. One night, as she delivered supplies to a hidden group of families, she came perilously close to discovery. A soldier rounding the corner, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, passed within mere feet of her hiding place. Her breath caught in her throat, heart thundering, palms sweating, but she did not move. He glanced at the alley, then moved on, unaware of her presence. That moment, suspended between life and death, crystallized something she already suspected. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Her small victories emboldened her, but they also attracted attention she could not ignore. Rumors began to circulate of a woman helping Jews escape, and though the whispers were cautious, she knew the danger of being identified. One careless word, one person with divided loyalties, could undo months of careful planning. She understood that she was now both hunter and hunted, protector and target, and the weight of responsibility pressed on her like a living thing. And then it happened. A knock on her door, late at night, sharp and deliberate. She froze, heart hammering, recognizing that the sound was familiar, yet terrifying. Could it be one of her neighbors, seeking help? Or was it a soldier, tipped off by some unknown betrayal? Every scenario raced through her mind, some ending in rescue, some in arrest, some in death. She crept toward the door, the shadows of her small apartment stretching long and uncertain across the floor. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Her hand reached for the handle, but it trembled violently. A single decision now would define the night, perhaps the lives of dozens, and certainly her own future. The door opened slowly, and a figure stepped inside. The figure in the doorway was neither soldier nor threat. It was a neighbor, eyes wide with fear but glinting with hope. She exhaled, relief flooding her body, but only briefly. Relief, she knew, could be dangerous in these times. Every encounter, every decision, now carried consequences far beyond her own life. That night, as she spoke in hushed tones, A plan began to form. A plan that would extend far beyond hiding one family or delivering food. She realized that saving lives on a meaningful scale would require organization, trust, and secrecy. The first step was assembling allies. She approached neighbors she knew could be discreet, observing them quietly over weeks, noting their habits, their morality, their willingness to act. Some were too afraid, their faces pale with terror, unwilling to risk even a glance at what was happening. Others nodded silently when she whispered the possibility of resistance, a spark of courage lighting in their eyes. Slowly, she built a small, trusted circle, a network of ordinary people who had extraordinary bravery when called upon. Next came the logistics: safe houses, secret routes, and forged documents. Each element had to be flawless, because even a single mistake could cost lives. She memorized every alley, every unused attic, every abandoned barn that could serve as a temporary refuge. She secured the cooperation of sympathetic shopkeepers who could provide food, clothing, or shelter without arousing suspicion. Forgers, quietly and carefully recruited, produced papers that could move people past checkpoints. Every piece was small, but together they formed a lifeline for those in mortal danger. Despite the careful planning, the risk was constant. Soldiers patrolled more frequently, curfews were enforced with brutal precision, and neighbors whispered about informants who reported any suspicious activity. She moved constantly between the roles of caretaker, strategist, and courier. The nights were long and tense, filled with the sound of distant gunfire, the creak of floorboards, and the occasional sharp command from a patrolling soldier. Her pulse rarely slowed, yet her resolve only hardened. Every life she saved made the risk worthwhile, but the danger loomed ever larger. One evening, she escorted a small group to a safe house on the edge of town. They moved silently through the shadows, hearts racing, boots crunching on frost-covered cobblestones. Each turn brought new threats: a patrolling soldier, a barking dog, the faint glow of lanterns in a neighboring window. When they reached the hideout, exhausted and shivering, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. She looked at the families, children clutching blankets, mothers holding babies, and felt the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. Each life entrusted to her care was now part of the network she was building, a fragile web of hope in a world gone mad. But trust, she soon learned, was fragile. One of her newest recruits, a young man with an eager willingness to help, began asking too many questions about the timing of her movements. He didn't mean harm, she realized, but any slip of the tongue could be fatal. She pulled him aside, whispered warnings about secrecy, and watched as understanding and fear settled on his face. In that moment, she realized that her network's strength depended not only on courage, but on absolute discipline, on the ability of each member to act without hesitation and without error. Weeks passed, and the network grew. Children were smuggled to safer regions, families were hidden in attics and barns, and supplies moved quietly under cover of night. Yet every success was shadowed by the knowledge that betrayal could come from anywhere. One of her trusted allies vanished without explanation, leaving behind a single, ominous note: "They are watching." Her stomach knotted. Was it a warning, a threat, or something more sinister? She had no way of knowing, and the uncertainty gnawed at her with a quiet, relentless fear. Despite the growing danger, her determination never wavered. The network had become more than a secret lifeline. It was a statement of defiance, a refusal to allow cruelty to go unchecked. Every life saved was a small victory, a proof that courage could exist even in the darkest of times. And yet, she understood that each success made the stakes higher. Soldiers were becoming aware, inspections more thorough, suspicion growing with every unexplained absence. One mistake now could unravel everything she had built. Then, late one night, a whisper of betrayal reached her ears. A member of her network had been seen talking to strangers, and rumors spread that information about their operations might have leaked. Her heart sank. Could it be true? Had one of her allies, even unintentionally, compromised the safety of those she was sworn to protect? The thought of the families she had hidden, the children she had carried in her arms, being discovered by the soldiers, sent a cold shiver down her spine. She clenched her fists and made a decision. She would not wait for disaster to strike. She would act first. She would confront the potential betrayer, assess the risk, and protect her network at any cost. The night was silent, the town seemingly asleep, but she felt the presence of danger all around her. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, footsteps echoed louder, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like a threat. As she approached the house where the suspected betrayal had taken place, she saw a figure in the window, someone moving in the shadows, watching her. Her pulse quickened. Was it the ally? Or was it someone else? Someone sent by the soldiers? Every choice she made in the coming moments could determine who lived and who died. She stepped closer, careful not to make a sound, and whispered a single word into the darkness. "Who's there?" The shadows of the town had become both her allies and her enemies. Every alley, every abandoned building, every quiet corner carried a dual promise, a place to hide and a place to be discovered. She moved constantly, never staying in one safe house for too long, always listening, always watching. The network she had built was fragile, a delicate lattice of trust, courage, and fear. And she knew that one wrong step could shatter it all. Each mission carried the weight of hundreds of lives, and failure was not an option. The latest task was one of the most perilous yet, smuggling an entire family through the town to a hidden farm on the outskirts, past patrolling soldiers and keen-eyed informants. The father, a man she had known since childhood, carried his young son while his wife clutched their daughter tightly. The children's wide eyes darted from shadow to shadow, unaware of the danger surrounding them. She led them through narrow streets, heart-hammering, palms slick with sweat. Every step a calculation. One misstep, one creak, one voice raised too loudly, and all would be lost. They reached a side street just as the patrol passed, soldiers' boots ringing sharply against the cobblestones. She held her breath, counting the seconds, willing them not to turn their heads. The soldiers stopped for a moment, scanning the street, then moved on. Relief washed over her, but it was brief, fleeting. Every close call reminded her that fear could not be ignored, that caution had to be constant. Yet each successful escape strengthened her resolve, proving that even under the tight grip of terror, bravery could prevail. Despite the small victories, danger was escalating. Soldiers were conducting more frequent inspections, rumors of informants grew, and the town itself was changing under the weight of occupation. Even those who had once offered help began to hesitate, afraid of the consequences. Each mission became more dangerous than the last, and her awareness of the risks sharpened. She learned to read the town like a living map, memorizing patrol patterns, listening for distant voices, watching for the faintest glow of lanterns and windows that shouldn't be lit. On one particularly cold night, she found herself escorting a group of children to a hidden attic above a bakery. The building was silent. The only sounds the wind whistling through cracks in the shutters and the occasional clatter from the streets below. She moved quickly, guiding the children up the narrow stairs and into the dark space, offering quiet reassurance. Their wide eyes reflected the flickering candlelight as she whispered that they were safe, at least for now. But safety, she knew, was always temporary in these times. Every hiding place was only as secure as her ability to protect it. It was during one of these missions, that she felt the first true touch of terror, not from soldiers, but from the realization that the network itself might betray her. A member of her circle, someone she had trusted implicitly, had grown careless. Notes were misplaced, routes were discussed too openly, and the smallest detail could have revealed dozens of hidden lives. The weight of responsibility pressed on her chest like iron. She could not falter. Every decision now mattered more than ever, and the margin for error had shrunk to nearly zero. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could she confront the careless member without endangering the families? Could she tighten security without raising suspicion? Every solution seemed to carry its own risk, and yet action was necessary. Hesitation would be fatal. She reminded herself that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. She could not allow fear to dictate her choices. She had a duty that exceeded her own safety, and she would meet it, no matter the cost. And then the danger became immediate. As she guided a group through a narrow alley, a flashlight suddenly cut through the darkness. The harsh beam landed on them, illuminating their terrified faces. She froze for a heartbeat, calculating her next move. The patrol had turned unexpectedly, and they were far too close for comfort. A child whimpered softly, the sound slicing through her like a blade. She knew that if they were discovered, every life she had fought to protect could be lost. She motioned for silence, dragging the children behind the nearest pile of crates. The soldiers' footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. Her heart pounded in her ears, every breath shallow, every muscle tense. Time seemed to stretch impossibly, each second heavy with the weight of potential disaster. One misstep would mean capture. One sound too loud would mean death not just for her, but for everyone she had sworn to protect. And then, as the soldiers paused mere feet away, she noticed movement from the shadows, a figure stepping forward, unseen by the patrol. Her pulse froze. Was it an ally, come to help at the last moment, or a spy, come to betray them? The shadowy figure in the alley moved with surprising speed, and for a brief moment, relief flooded her chest. An ally had arrived, just in time. But that relief vanished almost instantly. Something was wrong. The figure hesitated, glanced nervously around, and then muttered a name she did not expect. Her stomach tightened, a cold dread settling in as realization struck. Someone she had trusted, someone she had counted on to protect lives, had betrayed them. In an instant, the patrol's flashlight swung toward them, sharp and unforgiving. Soldiers barked commands, rifles leveled, and panic erupted among the children she had been guiding. She acted without thinking, her instincts overriding fear. Pulling the nearest child behind her, she darted into the shadow of a nearby doorway. Heart pounding, lungs burning. She could hear the shouts of soldiers, the clatter of boots on cobblestones, and the terrified cries of those she was sworn to protect. Every second felt like an eternity. Every movement could be their last. Betrayal, she realized, was a weapon more deadly than any rifle. The network she had painstakingly built was exposed, and the consequences were immediate. Soldiers moved with precision, knowing where to look, what to expect, and how to corner their prey. Families that had once trusted her guidance were now in grave danger, and she knew that her own life hung in the balance. Every action had to be calculated. Hesitation would mean death, not just for her, but for dozens of innocent lives. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to control the frantic beating of her heart. The patrol split into pairs, moving methodically down the street, scanning every shadow, every doorway, every hint of movement. She could hear whispers in her mind. Why did they betray us? Who is the spy? How many will die because of one careless action? Her training, instinct, and courage coalesced into a single focus: survive, protect, and fight. Guiding the children through back alleys, over fences, and past deserted courtyards, she felt the full weight of her responsibility pressing down. Each step required precision, courage, and the ability to anticipate the soldier's next move. A misplaced foot, a misjudged turn, a sudden shout, any of these could reveal their hiding place. Yet, despite the terror, her resolve hardened. Lives depended on her, and surrender was not an option. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated by fleeting glimpses of soldiers in the distance. Eventually, they reached the relative safety of a hidden attic she had prepared weeks before, a place filled with blankets, water, and the quiet hum of hope. The children huddled together, trembling, eyes wide with fear, and she whispered reassurances she barely felt herself. For a moment, they were safe, but she knew the danger was far from over. The network was compromised, and the threat was no longer distant. It was inside the walls of her own carefully guarded world. She confronted the person she suspected of betrayal later that night. The young man, eyes wide with guilt, admitted to being coerced, threatened by soldiers with the lives of his own family. The revelation was a dagger to her heart. She understood, even sympathized. Yet, she could not ignore the cost. Dozens of lives had been imperiled because of one lapse, one moment of fear. She realized then that courage was not just about bold acts. It was about vigilance, discipline, and the unrelenting awareness that others' weaknesses could become deadly mistakes. Despite the betrayal, she refused to surrender. She strengthened her network, tightened security, and shifted the routes and safe houses, creating new paths that no soldier could predict. Every member of the network was briefed, every hiding place reinforced, and every plan revised. The stakes had never been higher, and failure was no longer an abstract concept. It was imminent, threatening, and unavoidable if she faltered. But the greatest danger came from outside, not from within. Reports of mass deportations began reaching her, families being loaded onto trains and transported to camps where survival was nearly impossible. The soldiers were relentless, their presence constant, their methods cruel and efficient. Each mission she undertook now felt like walking a knife's edge, balancing the lives of children, mothers, fathers, and her own against the merciless machinery of Nazi power. And she knew that sooner or later, her luck would run out. Then, one stormy night, a messenger arrived with urgent news. A transport of children had been scheduled for dawn, one that included some she had helped hide. The information was precise, the timing unforgiving. She had to act immediately, or those children would be lost forever. Her mind raced, calculating the routes, the dangers, and the few minutes she had to prevent a catastrophe. She looked at the small group of families huddled in the attic, their faces pale in the dim candlelight, and felt the full weight of the moment. Everything she had risked, everything she had built, led to this single decision. And then she realized something chilling. She was not alone in the streets tonight. Soldiers were watching, waiting, hunting. Her hands clenched into fists, resolve hardening into steel. One choice remained: act, or let the children be taken. And with the first light of dawn creeping over the rooftops, she stepped into the street. The streets were quiet as dawn broke, but the silence was deceptive. Every shadow, every distant sound could mean discovery. She moved with precision, carrying the weight of dozens of lives on her shoulders. Children clutched her hands. Mothers followed closely. Fathers guided others, all trusting her judgment, all relying on her courage. The Nazis were still hunting, their patrols relentless, but she had learned their patterns, anticipated their movements, and memorized every alley that could hide a fleeting life. Today, she would act not as a single woman, but as the orchestrator of salvation. The operation began with a small convoy of families she had helped hide in safe houses across the city. Hidden carts, false identities, and the cover of early morning fog were her allies. Each movement had been rehearsed, every detail planned to reduce the risk of detection. Yet despite months of careful preparation, tension was constant. Soldiers could appear anywhere. Informants could betray them at a moment's notice, and the slightest mistake could unravel everything. Her hands were steady, but her mind raced, calculating every possibility. One by one, families were guided to waiting transport, secretly organized to carry them beyond the reach of Nazi patrols. She whispered reassurances to children who didn't understand the magnitude of what was happening, whispered courage to mothers who tried to hide their fear, and offered silent nods to fathers whose faces were pale with worry. The first few families reached safety without incident, and for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel hope. But she knew that hope was fragile. The danger was never far, never fully absent. As the day wore on, the scale of her efforts became clearer. Safe houses emptied. Families were moved through secret paths, and documents she had helped forge allowed passage past checkpoints that would have otherwise meant certain death. Word of her bravery had spread quietly, inspiring others to join the network. Ordinary citizens, motivated by courage and conscience, offered what little they could: food, clothing, or directions. Each act, small on its own, contributed to a vast chain of defiance, all coordinated by a woman whose determination had become legendary in her quiet corner of the world. But victory was never guaranteed. At one point, a patrol arrived unexpectedly near a hidden crossing. She froze, heart-hammering, assessing the soldiers' positions. She could feel the children behind her, trembling, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand the danger. A split-second decision was required: retreat and risk being cornered, or advance and trust in the network she had built. She chose the latter, stepping forward with calculated confidence, guiding the convoy past the patrol without a sound. Relief flooded her, but it was tempered with awareness. This was far from over. Days turned into weeks, and her operations continued with relentless intensity. Each successful rescue bolstered her resolve and strengthened the network until the cumulative impact became staggering. By the time the Nazi occupation began to falter and collapse under the pressure of the Allied advance, she had helped save over 2,500 Jewish lives. Families who would have been lost to the machinery of death now survived, carrying with them children, memories, and the seeds of hope for a post-war future. Her courage had become a lifeline, a defiance that no uniform, no threat could extinguish. And yet, despite the victories, she carried a burden heavier than any weight in the world. She remembered the faces she could not save, the children taken before she could reach them, the families whose homes she could not hide in time. Each memory etched a permanent scar on her heart. Heroism, she realized, was inseparable from grief. Every life saved was a triumph, but every life lost was a shadow she would carry forever. After the war ended, she walked quietly among the survivors she had saved. Mothers embraced children, fathers wept, and families reunited in tearful, joyous celebration. Yet in the midst of this, she felt a strange solitude. Her courage had changed the course of history for thousands, but it had also marked her life irreversibly. She had stared death in the face countless times, outwitted danger again and again, and in doing so had carried the fate of hundreds of families in her hands. She never sought fame or recognition. Her bravery was quiet, practical, and profoundly human. Those she saved remembered her with gratitude, and generations afterward, stories of her courage spread quietly, like a ripple across time. She had faced tyranny, fear, and betrayal, and yet had remained steadfast, proving that one determined individual could alter the course of history. And though the war ended, she knew that courage and vigilance were not finished. The memories, the lessons, and the responsibility would remain with her always. Walking through the streets she had once known as a child, she understood that heroism was not a single act, but a lifetime of choices, small and large, made in the face of danger. The lives she had saved were proof of what ordinary people could achieve when they refused to look away. She paused in the quiet evening, gazing at the town she had fought to protect, and felt both relief and sorrow. The weight of what she had done would never leave her, nor should it. She had saved thousands, yes, but the echoes of the fallen, the lost, and the betrayed remained. Courage, she realized, was never without cost. Yet, even with the memories of pain and loss, she smiled faintly, knowing this. In the darkest of times, one person's courage could ignite hope for thousands, and in that hope, the world could endure.